Thank you, Mike, very much. And thanks everyone for tuning in and listening. And I will look forward to your comments and questions. Uh, in 2009, I wrote a biography of Abraham Lincoln. It was the bicentennial of his birth. And then someone suggested I should write a biography of Ulysses S. Grant. And although Grant was obviously in the Lincoln biography, I had not gone very far where I discovered I didn't really know the man. And I felt that others didn't also. I knew that the 2022 would be an important time of his birth. And so I wanted to see what was different about Grant. What did we not know about him? I'm sure every one of you knows from your experience, your education, the things you've heard. Oh my goodness, Grant was a drunkard. He was, as president, he was involved with multiple scandals. He perhaps was a overzealous general who, unlike Robert E. Lee, committed his troops to incredible numbers of casualties. Well, it's interesting how we are now rethinking Grant. We have the C-SPAN Presidential Historian Survey, which takes place every time there is a change of presidents. Interestingly, there is not one being done right now. You would have thought so in the year 2025. But Grant has risen 13 places in the 21st century, 13 places in the C-SPAN Presidential Historian Survey. Why is that? What has caused that rise? When I do biographies, there's several things that I think are important, and I use this kind of pattern to try to understand who Ulysses S. Grant was. First of all, I'm very interested in what I call formation, or what you might call the youth years of American leaders. I think a lot of American biographies, perhaps understandably, go very quickly, almost too quickly from my perspective, to the adult leader, general, president, whoever it might be. Interestingly, Grant himself said the reason I do not read biographies is because they do not tell me about the boy who became the man, or we would say today the girl who became the woman. And so I wanted to delve into Grant's formation. What was it about this person? I had to admit from the beginning that I think Grant's leadership is what I would call a latent kind of leadership. No one recognized him as a young person, that he was a potential leader. I don't believe he recognized that in himself. But what was the family in which he grew up? I want to find out that formation. And this leads to a second part of the way I do biographies of Abraham Lincoln, Grant, Joshua, Lawrence Chamberlain, and now I'm writing a biography of John Quincy Adams. I think there's a faith story often in these persons that again has been overlooked. Don't get me started as to why. Is it the historian himself, herself, who doesn't think this is important? Who might say, oh, well, that's the 19th century, that's what people were. Well, to me, it became very obvious that Abraham Lincoln's faith story became ultimately a Presbyterian story. When he grew up in a very second great awakening, very emotional Baptist setting, he ultimately rejected that as a young man, just like many of our children or grandchildren might do today. But then, when he became especially president, he began attending the New York Avenue Presbyterian Church, listening to Phineas Densmore Gurley, the minister, and I believe that in his presidency, you see a whole new kind of engagement with religion, Presbyterian religion, most formidably in the second inaugural, where in 701 words, Lincoln will mention God 14 times, invoke scripture 4 times, and prayer 3 times. Well, I wondered about Grant because Grant has not ever been seen heretofore as any sort of a religious person. But his parents were deeply Methodist in their town in Ohio. And interestingly, we now are aware of the National Cathedral, which is always the setting for important memorial services and funerals of American leaders. It's an Episcopal cathedral. But actually, the Methodist Church built the first national church in Washington. And interestingly, they decided to dedicate it 4 days before Grant became president, because for them, he was the Methodist president. So when I try to discern what are the qualities in Grant's life, I think some of them are the Methodist qualities, certainly 19th century Methodism. There's a remarkable humility in Grant's story. Oh, I wish it were present today. It doesn't seem to be in today's political leaders. And so begin, those of you who have read the biography will know that I begin with a story of Grant arriving in Washington. He has been summoned by President Lincoln to become general in chief of all the Union armies. And when he walks into the Willard Hotel, in those days it was called Willard's Hotel, he comes to the front desk with his young son and asks simply for a room. And the desk clerk, sort of taken aback, says, "Well, sir, don't you know this is the city of the national capital? This is the busiest hotel in the city. You're asking for a room. Don't you understand what's going on?" "Well, maybe I could give you a room on the sixth floor, a tiny room on the top floor of the hotel." And so then you remember he asks Grant to sign the hotel register. And when he does so, he simply writes U.S. Grant and Son, Galena, Illinois. When the desk clerk reads the register, he's just amazed. He said, "Sir, why didn't you tell me who you were?" And I have to go back, if I will. This is the time of the United States Open tennis tournament, to that time many years ago when Serena Grant said to the 105-pound Chinese lineswoman, "Don't you know who I am?" Well, Grant would never have said, "Don't you know who I am?" which the modern celebrities would say. So I think part of the value of understanding who he is understanding both the formation, and part of that formation is the faith story. Another part of the puzzle that I wanted to unlock was, well, who is Julia in this story? Often, up until fairly recently, the women, the part of the story, were not really lifted up or understood. And I think Julia is a very, very important part of this story. It's interesting how people marry. You could almost say that Ulysses and Julia were opposites. He was if anything, kind of an introvert, and she is an extrovert. She became very well known and appreciated for the parties, that the social events that she put on in the White House. So I suggest that Grant is a latent leader. He is not necessarily an outstanding student at West Point. His first job really is posted out to the Pacific coast, to Oregon and California. It's still maybe to be determined why he ultimately resigned. Was he about to be court-martialed for perhaps overzealous drinking? We don't know. But at the moment that he is elevated to become a lieutenant, he offers his resignation to the Secretary of War, Jefferson Davis. And he returns home to Julia's home, really, outside of St. Louis. And there he is, and then he moves finally up to Galena, Illinois, a very nondescript person at that moment, and the Civil War breaks out. And then we know the story of how he starts almost at the bottom, but begins to assume commands. He begins to attract the attention of Lincoln at Fort Donelson, and then Shiloh, and Vicksburg, and Chattanooga, and then assumed command of all the Union armies. And unlike the previous commanders who had fought for several days and then rested and refitted, he understood that he had the larger army, and so he would fight continuously and believed that in this way he could ultimately wear down Robert E. Lee. It's interesting right now, I guess we're having a debate to be sure that Robert E. Lee is a part of West Point, which I believe he should be. He was the commander at West Point, quite apart from being the general of the Confederate Army. So then I was interested in the story of the presidency of Grant. That's where he's really suffered greatly in previous eras and some previous biographies. And I tried to understand more of what it meant for him to be the president. What sort of a president was he? How was he willing to give credit to others? How did he take the lead in some very important, difficult moments, financial moments, political moments? And then finally, I wanted to tell the story of writing of his memoirs. A lot of misunderstanding about those memoirs. Again and again, I've had people say to me in public meetings, well, did Mark Twain help write the memoirs? At that point, when he began to write his memoirs, he was diagnosed with cancer. He struggled to do this, but he went forward. The doctors would say that he only really persevered because he had to complete the memoirs. He did not think of himself as a great writer, but Twain did think of him as a great writer, just a very straightforward writer. And so, if you have not read his memoirs, I really commend them to you. They are really kind of an American classic. So, I spent quite a bit of time trying to write about how he wrote those memoirs. And you may recall that he would, when he could no longer speak, well, he would write notes to his doctors and talk about the fact that he was struggling just to finish the memoirs. We believe he did 3 days before he died. Again, if you've not been to the Grant Cottage in New York, I commend it to you. I think they do a wonderful job of presenting it. You may remember that Grant's son, at the moment of his death, stopped the clock at the very time that Grant died. So it's interesting to me that Grant has risen. I've been privileged in my journey, to my great surprise, to become a friend of General David Petraeus. We've done now, I think, 4 events together. In 2022, he co-hosted an event with Ron Chernow and myself in New York, a beautiful event on the evening of the bicentennial of Grant's birth. And General Petraeus believes that Grant is the greatest American general. Dwight Eisenhower never had a tactical command. And I learned a great deal from General Petraeus as to why he thought Grant was such a great general. How Petraeus in the surge in Iraq asked his generals to read Grant's memoir to understand the dogged determination of Grant, which they would very much need for their own lives. So it's interesting when you go out then and speak about someone. I've been privileged to do that in many, many different locations. And people will come up to me to say, well, I always thought Grant was very, very outstanding person, never deserving the full recognition he deserved. And others would say, well, no, I never knew much about him. I'd been taught the whole shibboleth that he was a drunk, that he was a kind of a scandal-ridden president. And I didn't know that he was such a remarkable person. So it's interesting how different climates of opinion, different eras. I think of this right now, if I might say this, that Grant was the person who created the Attorney General. And this is very interesting because up until Grant's time, the Attorney General was the president's lawyer. It seems like we've returned to that right now. And Grant said, no, 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 the Attorney General should not be the president's lawyer. He was the one who set in motion the idea that the Attorney General should have an independent role apart from the president. To be sure, the president would appoint the Attorney General, but he did not want the Attorney General to be the lawyer of the presidency. Another aspect of Grant that I think today does not deserve the credit that it deserves. So hopefully this is just a kind of an offering. Some of you know this story so well. I would now just like Mike to enjoy the opportunity to have comments and questions, and perhaps we can then talk more about Grant and why we think he's very important. Thank you.
All right. So we do have a number of chat features. Bill says, in college, we had a professor pull a question to whose answer was found in a footnote. Not fair. Who says footnotes are not important?
Well, footnotes are important, and I believe annotated footnotes are important. And For the thoughtful reader, they're really the guide to how you can go deeper, further, wider in the subject. And so certainly as I'm writing about Grant or Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, I'm reading the footnotes to discover where they might lead me. I might just take off. Well, that's enough said there. If I'm not sure if I'm answering the question that you're asking.
Jesse says, I go to the Grant Cottage whenever I can.
Ah,
I cannot stress enough how wonderful it is and how it is almost entirely as it was. Guides, extremely knowledgeable, amazing artifacts. They do not shy away from discussing the circumstances of Grant's illness and last week's. Beautiful location and great trails to the view Grant looked out over. The incredible Dr. Fields is sometimes there as well. You must go. The grounds is free. The tour is inexpensive. Mount Gregor, Wilton, New York.
thank you. I had an invitation to come again this summer, and I'm sitting out here in Pasadena, California, so I didn't get east this summer, but I wrote to the director. I said, "Well, keep me on your list." I said, maybe next summer. And I have some friends in Pasadena who have a home in the Adirondacks. And last week they went to Grant's Cottage because I said, you got to go there. And it really is well done. And so I really commend Grant's Cottage, and what you say about it is completely accurate. Thank you.
Larry says, what was Grant's relationship with Stanton?
Thank you, Larry. What was his relationship with Stanton? Well, this became a Stanton became a very controversial figure in the Johnson administration. There was a law passed that you could not fire people that had been appointed by your predecessor. And yet, Stanton, who I think had sometimes a kind of a difficult personality, came to blows almost with Johnson. But Grant worked well with Stanton and appreciated who Stanton was, and the you could say the professionalism that he brought to the position. And so he did not have the clash with Stanton that was taking place by Johnson.
And Michael says Grant College will be open until the end of October.
Yes, good. Yeah, great. Great time to go with the leaves. Right.
And Rosemary says the Capital District Civil War Roundtable has had a long relationship with Grant's Cottage. I endorse Jesse's comments.
Oh, okay. I did not know that. Very good. Good. Great.
And MC says, can you talk a little about why Grant attended West Point and did he enjoy his time there?
Why did Grant attend West Point? Well, in many ways, his father wanted him to attend West Point. West Point in those days was maybe the best or one of the best engineering schools. And so his father thought, well, if you go there, you can become an engineer, and that will be a well-paying job. I mean, McClellan parlayed his education at West Point to become a well-paid railroad engineer. And it's, in a sense, a free education. So Grant wasn't all that enthusiastic about going, but in a very earlier era where children obeyed their parents, I think Grant went not necessarily enthusiastically. He didn't do so well often when he was there, but in the long run, he looked back upon that as a very important part of his formation.
Michelle says, from what I've read, Grant and his wife had a real partnership as opposed to relationships where the husband is the head of the household and his wife is considered a helpmate, but not a real person on her own. Do you think Grant's personality really blossomed under the affection and support of Julia?
Boy, I like the way you say that. You say that so well, and I could not agree with you more. In an era where women were the general of the home, but please do not exist in the public sphere or certainly not in politics. I hadn't thought about it quite that way, that in a sense, Julia deserves a great deal of credit for Grant blossoming, because more than one would observe in those social events at the White House that she was the one who was so outgoing and welcoming and asking questions, and Grant was almost hanging back at times, kind of, and he almost deferred to her. So, yes, I think they had a real partnership and a really wonderful marriage. And I did want to try to lift that up in the biography because I think that she has often not received the due that she did. And one of the most remarkable stories, this is after Grant's death and after uh, uh, when she's vacationing on the Hudson, which was a great place to vacation, she learns that the wife of the head of the Confederacy is there, and who has also died, Jefferson Davis. And she goes and knocks on her door and introduces herself. And then later on, people observe the two of them riding down Fifth Avenue in a carriage. So when you talk about reconciliation, which Grant offered Lee at Appomattox, well, Julia offered Jefferson Davis's wife, Verena, reconciliation in the Hudson Valley Resort, and they became friends. I think that's an amazing story.
Pete says, please share your view of Grant's and Sherman's evolution of military relationship and friendship.
Thank you very much for that question. I think that's one of the most interesting parts of what I call a piece of the puzzle. You couldn't have had two people more different in personality. And you may know that Sherman early in the war did not do well. People even were ready to diagnose him with some sort of insanity, and he wasn't really advancing. But Grant always saw in Sherman qualities that maybe Sherman didn't see himself, or others certainly didn't see. And then the famous story where uh, Grant, after the victory at Shiloh, is suddenly sort of placed second in command as they advance south towards Corinth. And Grant, discouraged by all of this, Halleck is going to come out and take command. He's ready to leave. And Sherman comes over to see him. He's tying up all of his things, putting his baggage together. And Sherman is the one who says, hey, don't do this. This will pass. Your time will come. You have the ability. Do not resign from the army. And so, of course, after Grant becomes first general of the army after the Civil War, continues to be general of the army and then president, why Sherman is elevated by Grant to be general of the army. So it's a remarkable friendship, and it tells the story, which maybe we need to hear today, that people of such differing personalities can learn to appreciate each other and become really quite deep friends.
Jesse says, according to a quote from Chernow, I forget his source, but was primary. Grant escorted Julia to breakfast and dinner like newlyweds, arm in arm. Someone late in the war at City Point observed them kissing like newlyweds as well, as bashful as if interrupted in courtship. Beautiful.
That's true. And people would come upon them in the White House, and here they are holding hands, how many years that they'd been married when they were in the White House. So yes, that was something that many, many people did observe. So yes, what Chernow says there is absolutely correct. Yes.
M says, thank you for presenting today. Did Grant initially want to be president or did he reluctantly agree because Johnson's policies were undoing what the Union soldiers had fought and died for? Also, what benefits as a general did he bring to the presidency? What were the downsides of his transition from the military to the executive office? Finally, was surprised that he was embraced for a third term.
Well, how unusual. Grant did not seek the presidency. It rather sought him. And as you suggest in the first part of your comment and question, it was because he saw how absolutely inadequate, really awful, was the presidency of Andrew Johnson. He never would have compared himself to Lincoln, but he thought that perhaps he could carry on the legacy of Lincoln, a legacy that Johnson had literally destroyed. So I'm getting all of the parts of your question. In some ways, being general helped him and hurt him as being president. He had learned how to trust his generals, how to give them authority. He was not a micromanager when he was general. But unfortunately, the men who were on his in his cabinet, often he did not choose. They were chosen to kind of have, well, let's have someone from the East and someone from the West and this and that and the other. And he didn't probably micromanage enough. He trusted that they knew what they were doing, and he trusted their integrity, and sometimes the trust was not fulfilled. So did I miss a third part, Mike, of the question? Refresh my memory there.
Was he surprised that he wasn't embraced for a third term?
Oh, yes, in some ways, he thought he could run for a third term. Obviously, there were no limits on that. And in a way, this is still an interesting present commentary. So many of our American presidents, almost all of them, have almost little foreign experience. They don't understand what's going on in other parts of the world. So here, Grant, after his two terms, goes off on this amazing world tour. And his son Willie says, well, now Dad is really prepared to be president. I mean, he gets involved in India and he said, man, we would not rule the way the British are. The Japanese asked him if he would be a mediator in their conflict with China. And he learned so much about these other nations, which he never knew before. So in some ways, he would have been quite prepared to serve a third term, but that did not happen.
I'm told that if he had been on the convention floor,
Ah,
he would have been selected to be that party's
well,
candidate.
that's a good comment too, because this says again something about Grant's humility or Grant's understanding. Interestingly, I'm writing this biography really of the third act of John Quincy Adams, and when he is the only president ever elected to Congress to any elective office after the presidency, why he says, you don't run for office, you stand for office. I'm not going to campaign. And if the people want me to be a congressman, well, all right, I will consider it, but I'm never going to campaign. A very, very different understanding of what it meant to run for political office. Yeah.
Dennis asks, would you discuss Grant's relationship with John Mosby and Mosby's family after Grant's death?
My goodness, I don't know that I know all of that about his relationship after his death. I do know that he was a very reconciling person to Confederate or ex-Confederate generals. But you can elaborate, you can inform me about that. I don't know that story.
Brian asks, wasn't Grant's brother-in-law involved in one of the major scandals during his presidency? And how did the president handle this?
Well, yes, that's exactly right. His son-in-law was involved in one of the scandals. And here again, I think Grant was, if the word is naive or didn't like confrontation, preferred to sort of maybe look the other way. And I think this was again kind of, you could say, a weakness. Obviously, when Grant gave his all of his money really over to his son, and then they were both taken, or the son was taken by a Ponzi scheme on Wall Street. Grant was too trusting, and so he should have stepped forward in some of these instances. He was not really an astute person in business.
Bill says, why has it taken until the 21st century for Grant to be recognized as a much better president than he was originally rated? You noted he has risen 13 slots, and the presidents in front of him are solid indeed. He is now 20th and 6 on pursued equal justice for all. Why was this missed earlier?
Well, this has a lot to do, I think, with the historians who were writing this. It goes all the way back to the early 20th century when their understanding of Reconstruction was very much a Southern understanding. You will remember that Robert E. Lee was the great Lionheart of the Civil War forever and ever and ever. And the point is not to demonize or put down Robert E. Lee, but Robert E. Lee kind of eclipsed Grant in terms of his status. Also, the Grant Papers is a big part of this. The Lincoln Papers began, and they helped us understand more of who Abraham Lincoln was. And then the Grant Papers got started later. And those papers unlocked the correspondence, the activity of Grant in a way that we had not seen before. And so the earlier biographers of Grant did not have access to those papers, which I think had a big role in changing the understanding. And then the interesting event of the Grant Presidential Library at Mississippi State University in Starkville. What? Grant is returning to Mississippi? And John Marszalek, who was the longtime director, deserves a great deal of credit, as does Frank Williams, in terms of elevating Grant and the whole Ulysses S. Grant Association, which began to publicize Grant and spread the word about Grant and bring in speakers at their annual meeting. So all of those factors together, I think, have really helped elevate Grant to the place that I believe he deserves.
Larry would like to know, why did Mary Todd Lincoln hate Julia Grant?
Well, Mary Todd Lincoln, and I'm not a Mary Todd Lincoln hater, as some are, but I think she was a kind of she, just remember her story. I think she saw her husband's political potential maybe before he did. She was fairly well educated for a young woman of her time. She was in some ways his advisor when they lived together in Springfield. And then she comes to Washington, and the women of Washington do not treat her well or fairly. They treat her kind of as a Western rube. And she no longer is his advisor. And William Seward is his advisor. Others are his advisors. So then when Julia Grant and Ulysses come into the story, she has a real jealous bone within her. And she was very, very wary of women who were going to somehow muzzle in on her role with her husband. And so she did not like Julia Grant. Unfairly, she saw her trying to achieve some sort of spotlight, and that made her very angry.
And Jesse seconds that nomination. Jerry would like to know, what a great program, or he says, what a great program. Thank you. And Chuck says, there has been recent commentary that Grant treated Rosecrans unfairly after Chattanooga, lasting late in their lives.
That's a good question. Good. Rosecrans, if you would have had a vote at West Point on who is most likely to succeed, he might have won the vote. And it appeared that he had a lot of ability and he had a lot of panache and good-looking fellow and all of that stuff. But Grant saw that from his perspective, Rosecrans had not done a good job at Chattanooga, and so he replaced him. And I think this was just his military judgment. At that point, he was, unlike the presidency, willing to make hard decisions. And I don't find myself disagreeing with that decision. You can have some empathy for Rosecrans, but Grant then comes in and shows you what could happen in the Chattanooga campaign that he leads.
Michael would like, did Grant have to resign from the military and give up his pension, or did he resign so Sherman could get his fourth star?
Well, this was a difficult question for Grant. Interesting one, how to understand that. I mean, he certainly wanted Sherman to take over and to succeed him. And so whether that, how he went about that is still a little bit ambiguous in terms of his decision making that he made so that he could give Sherman the way. He was not a person who hung on to his own sense of entitlement. Yeah.
Bill's asked, why all the controversy whether he was a drunk or not? I understand he could not handle distilled spirits, or so it has been written. But was he under the influence at any time during his campaigns?
Well, here I have enormous respect and appreciation and friendship with Ron Chernow, but he makes, as we all know, much more of Grant's drinking than I do. I don't find any evidence that he was ever under the influence of alcohol in any of the battles, in any of his military rule. I think he had a problem with alcohol when he was younger. Some have argued that that often was a part of a depression when he was away from Julia and away from the first child who he'd never even met. But I don't see alcohol. I found many instances where there were public banquets and alcohol was served very freely in those days, and he would turn it away, not accept it. So I don't see that the alcohol influenced him on the battlefield.
Not only that, but he was a general for what, 4 years and
Yeah, yeah,
president for 8.
right.
And what kind of alcohol or alcoholism did he have as a president, right?
Yeah, I don't think he had much at all. No, I think that was an earlier Grant. Yeah.
M asked, how did Grant's spirituality and religious orientation affect how he imparted the Confederate leadership grace and leniency after their surrender?
That's a great question. I make more than heretofore biographies of his involvement with the Methodist Church in Washington. He was on the board of trustees. Julia, on a Christmas Eve service with his presence, burned the deed so that they would sell it. They had now paid off the building of the church. And I just want to believe when I ask the question, well, the question you've just asked, well, how could he offer this kind of reconciliation to Lee? Where does where does that come from? I really do believe you can't say title and verse, but this comes from his own kind of Christian upbringing. And this is a part of who he became, and it all came to fruition at Appomattox. I think you have to understand Grant as the Methodist layperson to understand Appomattox.
Robert says, you've contrasted about Grant's judgment of trusting character being positive during the war versus being poor during his presidency. Were there any specific events as a boy or young man established his ability to judge or not judge people correctly?
Wow, it's a wonderful question. Well, yeah, I don't know that I could go back to being a boy or a young man. The first time that I thought I saw his latent leadership, if I could expand upon your question, was in the crossing of the Panama Canal, where everyone is dying of cholera. And suddenly he steps forward and exercises command. And so the fascinating question is, when does a person really become a leader? I think that's the first real evidence that Grant is the leader. And I don't think he was necessarily a leader at West Point. I don't know that we could go back and think about his boyhood in terms of the reconciling. He had a wonderful reputation among the boys that he knew. They liked him very much. The interesting thing that I also found there, a little bit sideways here, is that he did not like to fire guns, which all the boys did. That was just part of the 19th century. But he did not want to use guns to kill animals. Yeah.
M asks, did Julia and Grant himself have empathy for Mary Lincoln when Lincoln was alive and afterwards?
Very good question. Did they have empathy for Mary Lincoln? I don't, they didn't know her well, obviously. I think Grant was with Lincoln maybe three times, but I don't think they had any negative opinions of her. I mean, they respected her. She was the wife of the President of the United States. But the one time when they were there in Virginia on where Grant or Lincoln is inspecting the troops, and Mary Lincoln gets very upset about women that were close to her husband. But I don't know that I found any evidence where they were critical of Mary Lincoln.
Dennis would like to know who did Grant appoint as ambassador to Japan? Is that in your footnotes?
Oh my goodness. I don't think I know at this point in the afternoon on a Friday.
M says Grant is said to have regretted that he hadn't accompanied Lincoln to Ford's Theater that fateful night,
Right.
thinking he could have averted the assassination. Do you think he would have been able to do so? And it happened so fast, he might have been able to fight, injure, or maybe kill Booth, but isn't it doubtful he would have had the jump on Booth from the get-go?
I agree. I don't see how he could have stopped that. I mean, this Booth is coming in from the back. They're both sitting there facing the stage. I don't think he could have done anything about it. I mean, he felt terrible when he gets off the train in Philadelphia and the word comes to him that Lincoln has been shot, and he feels terrible. You may remember why that happened, why Julia was the one who wanted, understandably, to get back to see their children. And then she felt that someone was shadowing her or kind of dogging her, where she was at lunch when she was in her carriage. So she said, let's just say we can't come tonight. It wasn't, I don't believe it was any comment on her part against Mary Lincoln. It was just that she thought it's time to get back to our children who lived in a suburb of Philadelphia.
And says, I'm fangirling here. So thank you for answering my questions. How did Grant, a horseman, feel about all the horses killed during?
Oh, that's quite a question because, yes, he was a remarkable horseman, just incredible horseman, and hard to appreciate what that means in the 21st century for the 19th century. And I do make the point that I think anybody who treats horses so well as he did, it says something again about their character. Not everybody treated the horses well at all. But my goodness, yes, that's quite a question. All the horses that were killed, was it, well, this is just the way warfare is? I don't know that he ever made a comment about that.
And speaking about horses, Grant was known as a great horseman.
Right.
You attribute that to his ability to be trusted by horses or his fearlessness to ride fast?
Well, he became a great horse person as a young boy. I mean, you may recall that people even brought their horses to him when he was quite young to train them. And he had the ability to develop a trust between horses. I grew up in Salinas, California, and I didn't realize until years later that our physical education in the kindergarten, first and second grade was riding horses. We had the California Rodeo in Salinas, California. Horses know who you are. They know if you are nervous. They know if you are going to treat them roughly. And so horses did trust Grant, and Grant trusted the horses. Yeah.
Right. George says, Dear Mr. White, excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And Dennis asked, didn't Grant punish a teamster who had been whipping his horse?
Yes, he did do that. He did do that when he saw this man who was whipping the horses. Boy, that really enraged him. You did not treat horses that way. So that was a point where he just immediately stepped into that situation. Absolutely, yes.
Jesse says, if there is time, can you talk about the friendship between Grant and Longstreet before and after the war?
Wow, I think that's one of the most remarkable friendships, and Elizabeth Varron talks about it in her very fine biography of Longstreet. And here again, two persons quite different. And Longstreet was not a good student, but Longstreet, as we know, then returns to the South and becomes, in the eyes of most of the people in the South, a scalawag, someone who supported Reconstruction and who was ultimately appointed by Grant to a position there in the South. And so they had this remarkable friendship. And I love the story early on when Grant returns to Missouri after being posted to the Pacific Coast, and he's not doing well. And he comes into St. Louis, and there is Longstreet with some of his fellows. And Longstreet reaches out to him, and Grant, I think, is deeply embarrassed by his own situation. But then, right after Grant signs the peace treaty with Robert E. Lee, why the Confederate soldiers come up, and Grant, understanding that must be a very difficult moment for Longstreet and these Confederate officers, he comes up to Longstreet, and the story goes, and sort of puts his arm around him and says, "Well, let's go back and have a game of brag again, kind of a form of poker." He wanted to break the ice with Longstreet and let him know that whatever had happened in the last 4 years, it did not and it could not destroy their friendship, which had been formed at West Point.
Gina said he was a natural horseman
Yeah.
before it was a method, and he was confident around them, comfortable and at home, and horses pick up and went with him easily.
Well, I couldn't agree more. You say it well. Yes, absolutely. I agree.
M says Grant had a great brush with death when the startled massive horse landed on him after he was after he was set up by the horse's owner to ride the challenging animal. Did he ever address how devastating this was and how difficult his recovery was? He offered Sherman to sign orders on his behalf, but Sherman declined.
This was a terrible moment. I mean, he was literally crushed, especially his leg. And it took him a long time, months really, to be able to recover fully, to be able to ride again. So this was one of the potential hazards of horseback riding, and he suffered for it, but he just, in his own way, he never complained. He just kind of went on and regained his physical stamina and regained his horsemanship. Yes.
Bill asks, can you discuss his removal and then reinstating of Custer in command of his unit in 1876?
I'm trying to think of what I remember the great parade of 1865, May 23 and 24, when Custer's horse kind of goes off and he's the great hero. And I don't recall that Grant said very much in his lifetime about Custer. I don't I don't think he knew him well, and so I just I don't think he went out of his way to either commend or criticize Custer.
And by the way, I was at the Little Bighorn about 4 or 5 days ago.
Oh my goodness.
They're building a new visitor center there.
Oh, are they really? Oh my goodness. Wow.
Other questions or comments? Vicky said, did Longstreet and Grant ever have contact during the war?
Vicky, I don't believe they did. Uh, I don't believe they did. I know that at the towards the very end, when Lee was struggling to know what to do, uh, Longstreet advised him in a sense, I know who Grant is. So Longstreet always put in a good word for Grant, even though he was in a sense the enemy, but I don't believe that they had any direct personal contact during the war.
Gina says, excellent talk. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Michaels says Grant claimed he would have had his bodyguards with him protecting the presidential box.
I don't know about that. I mean, I certainly respect Horace Porter, who I think his volume about, Grant and the war is really first rate. And I don't recall that he said that. I don't know that Grant would have done that. Yeah,
Tim asked,
possibly.
what was the relationship between Horace and Grant?
A very close relationship, but very much appreciative of Horace Porter. And Grant really liked him, applauded him, and when he years later would write his own memoir, why he really appreciated Horace Porter's volume. Yeah, yeah.
Jenny says, wonderful presentation. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, let's let that be the last comment. Dr. White, thank you for being with us tonight and sharing your knowledge of this great American.
Well, Mike, thank you for your invitation, and thanks to everyone who's participated this evening. I'm the beneficiary. Thank you.
All right. And everyone, have a wonderful weekend. And I hope to see you next Friday.